Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is ship updates, more or less. So, as of the recording of this video, there really isn't any ship news, though I'm sure that by the time I release it, of course, something will have come out. But I wanted to kind of talk about ships in general, and one of the updates that I think that all ships should get. Now, this footage, you've actually seen this footage highly sped up before, and this was me kind of originally going out and doing some missions exploring the reputation system. Now, these missions take me to different places. They take me to places like Daymar, Yella, Chelon, all these different moons around Crusader. And all of these moons have different environments. Yella is, of course, a frozen ice world. Daymar is a desert planet, not unlike Dune. Chelon, I mean, it's without an atmosphere, and it's kind of, it's not exactly an environment that at face value you'd say, oh, it's its own kind of environment, but you could say that it's probably a very, it's a place that's very exposed to radiation because it lacks an atmosphere or something like that. So you could say that these are three separate unique environments that would require three separate and unique solutions in terms of the clothing that your character might wear, the armor that you might bring, those sorts of things. We've been talking in the past about there are certain ships that just simply don't have an option for players to carry different types of armor, different types of weapons, different types of equipment that you may need. Not every mission is going to be a combat mission. Maybe you want to bring survival gear because you're on a search and rescue mission. Maybe you want to bring tools because you're on a salvage mission. You got to get the black box out of the wreck of a ship or something like that, which requires you to be exposed to that environment for a certain amount of time. And we've talked about this, and we've certainly highlighted ships like the Cutlass and other ships that seem to be ideally placed to a certain degree to enable this type of gameplay. And that's really kind of what Star Citizen is all about, is you might start on Yella, but you may end up on Daymar, or you're not really sure which mission you're going to get when you log in. So you have to have multiple options available to you to solve those problems, right? And that's kind of why these ships are increasingly popular within the community, and why a lot of people probably still own a Cutlass Black, because they're like, realistically, yeah, I do want to have a fighter, but there's so much going on out there. I kind of want to have a ship that enables so many different types of gameplay, and this is why the larger ships are often very, very popular. And you see a lot of people who, even though they're kind of focused towards the fighter end of things, they often look at things like a Connie or a Corsair or a Redeemer or something like that, and they go, but that's my big ship. That's, the me ship. That's my ship for getting around the universe, because they realize, some people have kind of come to this realization later than others, and of course there is an Invictus sale coming up, so people will be moving things around as these things become more real, and they stop kind of sticking their head in the sand. They realize that I'm going to need these solutions with me, and it's not a case of, oh, I have to go to Daymar, but wait, let me fly all the way over to this station and pick up desert camo, desert outfit, desert weapons, desert survival equipment, and then go and do the mission. They kind of want to have those things on their person, and that's what's driven the popularity of a lot of these ships. But there's a different side to this, which is when you kind of go and you look at the storage options within these ships, whether it's a gun rack in the Cutlass, which holds 4 guns, or the little, dressing lockers that you have in something like the Hammerhead, you realize that the storage space that we have, what's been physically partitioned for equipment storage, is, it's not enough, right? Now, recently CIG showed off a whole bunch of new armor sets that they're going to be bringing into Star Citizen, and they are fantastic. They look absolutely great, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh, I'm going to need all these different outfits. If you look at this heavy tactical outfit that they were showing you, this might be very very appropriate for a place like Chelon or a place like Yella at night. Whereas if you're on the light side of a moon, you may wish to go with a lighter option. Or if you happen to land on Daymar, you might want to get a desert camo version of that armor. Now, CIG has shown off the many different coloring options, but it's very obvious that all these different armors, the undersuits, the weapons, the equipment, all of that, there really isn't enough storage space in most of the ships in Star Citizen to carry around all these options for one player, let alone multiple players, right? This is kind of where we're stepping into almost a World of Warcraft type space, where you would have to have like the magical bag of holding, or the general options that you would have in those MMOs, where it's like, well, I have 4 or 5 different gear sets and I keep them all in my bags. That's very unrealistic, but I think a good balancing point that CIG could pick is to actually make the storage areas within our ships. On the outside, they would physically represent 1 or 2 of the items in that storage area. And there would obviously have to be a certain storage limit to it, because it would have to be somewhat grounded in realism. But I think that we could be very, very forgiving in that way, where there's an outward representation of, you see a piece of armor or an undersuit hanging on a coat hanger in that closet, but when you go up to it and you open your inventory, which is kind of the direction it seems that CIG is going, you're going to see a much wider inventory within it. Because when you look at all these different options and all the different colorations, you can start to see, this would be good in a forest environment, this would be good in an Arctic environment, this would be good in a desert, and so on and so forth. But realistically, to have all these things in these places, there really just is not enough storage space within the ships that we currently have. And it's not just a question of adding storage to ships that just have no storage to begin with, but the existing storage in ships that are built that way. I think that we have to kind of suspend disbelief here, and we have to basically make it so that no matter what you're going for, you can bring that with you in the game, and you can take that where you're going to need to take it. Because even with just a simple mission like refilling the drug labs around Crusader, that requires you to go to Daymar, Yella, and Chelon, and those might require 3 unique armor sets, which would require you to be able to carry all those 3 sets in order to do that mission. And even within the confines of something like the Cutlass, I mean, it has very minimal storage space. So you could see how you would run out of space very, very quickly. So I think that moving forward, unless we want to go and completely redesign the interiors of so many of these ships to allow for this type of storage, I think we all have to kind of shake hands on this one and say, okay, that's the limits. We're willing to kind of accept the fact that this goes a little bit beyond reality, but for gameplay reasons, we're going to allow this. This could potentially solve the problems of the interior of the Hammerhead, which some players deny even to this day exists, though, I mean, you only have to take 5 minutes walking around in a Hammerhead and you're like, there's actually nowhere to store a single firearm, in the game. Whereas you could walk up to one of the closets in the, in the crew area and simply open that up, and you could have a shirt hanging there and a little pistol, sitting at the bottom shelf, and then you could just open up an interaction menu, and that would allow you to kind of mix and match things out of your personal inventory and out of the inventory that closet represents, rather than that closet's contents accurately reflecting what is in that closet at that time. I think that that's a little place where we can kind of make that leap and make these two systems kind of work together. Now, in the past, I've kind of advocated for certain things because of the fact that, it would be unrealistic to expect it to be any other way. And I've said, if we're basing this in reality, if we're saying that, a coffee cup left on the surface of a planet should be there until, the next person shows up at that location and goes like, oh, there's a coffee cup here. And if we're overly strict with these rules, we can start to dip into an area that many survival games suffer from, in my opinion, which is that we overdo it and we actually take away from the fun of the game. And I feel that in a situation like that, it's important to say that yes, it is entirely unrealistic, but at the same time, I think it makes the game better. A perfect example of this is actually being introduced to the game very, very soon. And that is, the Planet Crusader and the landing site of Port Orison, or Orison, whatever it's going to be called. Now, as a quick recap, what is Port Orison? What is Crusader? Crusader is a gas giant. Port Orison is the Crusader Industries shipbuilding facility that exists in a quote-unquote breathable layer of this gas giant. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. One, the reason why you're building ships in a gas giant or in the atmosphere of a gas giant is so that you can exist in that breathable layer, so you can effectively be in a dry dock. All your workers can work without protective equipment, and that is considered to be, an advantage. Well, it's not really an advantage because you're existing in the atmosphere of a gas giant, so you're existing in a much more powerful gravity well. So why wouldn't you just build these things on the surface of a planet? If you can overcome the gravity well of a gas giant, then why wouldn't you just build it on the surface of a planet, like Hurston or Microtech or something along those lines? Why would you use a gas giant? Second of all, there really is no such thing as a breathable layer in a gas giant. It doesn't exist because molecular hydrogen is lighter than molecular oxygen. So the oxygen would exist so deep in the atmosphere that it would be hypercompressed and you wouldn't be able to exist in that environment. You would die. So your two main selling points of building, this facility in the atmosphere of a gas giant actually don't work. So you might look at someone like me who is somewhat questioning of the value that we're going to get out of Port Orison from a server performance standpoint, especially when many of the fixes and many of the optimizations that the game would need to run, very well aren't in yet. So this could probably be very detrimental to the game's performance on the servers. Then why aren't I not using these arguments to get rid of Port Orison altogether? Like, just delete it. It wouldn't exist in reality, and it's probably going to screw up server performance, so why not just get rid of this thing altogether? And this is where the rule of cool comes in, and I believe the rule of cool holds sway in this argument, which is it's a cool environment. It's a great environment. And I mean, imagine what sunsets are going to look like in this area. So we can kind of take those realism arguments and we can say, okay, but it's cool. And at the same time, performance arguments, we can kind of set those aside as well, because eventually they're going to get there to a point where this is sustainable. It may not be immediate, and maybe we are going to have to, revisit some unfortunate bugs because of this. True. And I would say delay it, but I wouldn't say remove it. And one of the reasons, why I'm kind of partial to Port Orison from an aesthetic point of view is because it reminds me of a different game that you played in the atmosphere of a gas giant. Some of you may have a bit of a hint as to what I'm talking about, but for those of you that don't, there was a video game, an early access video game, which I think now 2 years ago actually unfortunately shut its doors. And it was very similar to Star Citizen in many respects. It was a fantastic concept. It was a great idea, and it was a lot of fun to play. It combined many different types of game elements, PvP, survival, base building, things like that, and it combined them in this really cool steampunk environment where you existed in the atmosphere of a gas giant, where certain magical or whatever properties allowed certain islands to float in the atmosphere of this gas giant, and you would go from island to island to island, from zone to zone to zone, and you would gather materials of varying qualities. You would get blueprints, or you would research blueprints to build more cool and interesting engines for your airship, you would start off with a sail and you would have to go with the wind, and then you would go up to these like rickety propeller engines, and then you would get all the way up to jet engines. It was a fantastic idea, and it was so much fun to play. But unfortunately, it did have some performance issues, and there were some overall gameplay issues that they didn't really jump on fast enough. And this, along with some design decisions, led to the game unfortunately being closed, and that game was Worlds Adrift. Now, probably for a small number of you who are watching this video, you've probably felt some distant similarities between Star Citizen and Worlds Adrift. Great idea, great concept, execution, bit of a, at times it's just like, I'm not sure that you're going the right way. But this, along with the idea of how to store things inside ships, I think is a good idea of where the rule of cool should hold sway. And Worlds Adrift is, for me, it's a constant reminder of, what a great concept can be, and the unfortunate consequences of when game developers kind of make decisions willy-nilly and sometimes take some shortcuts that ultimately ruin the thing that they're trying to create. When you're too rigid about your ideas about how things should work, and you're not really willing to say, yes, realism says this, but gameplay and fun say that, and you're not willing to be flexible in that world, that can lead to your world disappearing. And I think that in this case, the storage of personal items and things like that, this is where the rule of cool should apply. And I'm not saying that every ship should have infinite storage for every type of armor, but it should be extremely generous, is what I'm saying, because I think it would just allow players to go out and get on with their adventures. Now, for those of you that do remember Worlds Adrift, you're like, oh man, Minion, don't, that game's too painful to remember, man. Don't break my heart like that. And some of you may be intrigued. You never saw this game when it came out. You never heard about it. And now you're like, maybe you want to go out and check out some YouTube videos of this game being played. And there's plenty of them out there. And I do encourage you to do that, because it was a fantastic game. Its bugs, its issues aside, it was an absolutely fantastic game. And it is a game that very much I would be playing right now. It would probably, if it had continued in development and gone in the direction it was looking to go, I can honestly say I might even have just sunsetted playing WoW for this, because it was so great. I mean, imagine being able to build your own steampunk airship and then going from island to island, with survival elements, but light touch survival elements, certain RPG elements. It was just such a great idea. And yes, I realize that the fans of this game, I am somewhat torturing you just a little bit right now. And I'm sorry. And some of you are going to go out on YouTube now, and you're going to kind of look this up, and you're going to be like, oh man, I totally missed out. Or, oh man, Minion reminded me of this. Now I'm looking at these videos and it's making me sad. I don't like this. And I trust me, it's painful for me to talk about this game too, because it was such a disappointment when they closed the doors. But while a game can die and can disappear, the spirit of a game, the idea behind a game, the way that a game is played, or the way that a world is delivered to the player can live on. So you may want to take a little bit of a spin past the Steam store and add a little something to your watch list, because we might be talking about that game a little bit in the future.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.